Welcome back to another video. On this one, it's going to be very similar to the first video I ever did, making a table for my own house. And the design of the table is going to be nearly identical to the couch table that I previously built. The reason for that being, it's going to be in the same room in my house and have a similar purpose. It won't be right behind the couch. It'll be near a window. We currently have a circular table and a circular table in a round room. Just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. A nice thin table will be a much more efficient use of our space, and we have some plants that we keep in the house. It'll be a perfect way to store those plants right under the window, let them get lots of sun, and not have to worry about it. As you can see here, starting off by breaking down the slab, so cut it long ways to create my first flat edge and the reference for the rest of the table. And then cutting off the main portion of excess. This table is going to be about 7 feet long and 15 or 16 inches deep. So cutting it just over that, you'll see later I'll end up trimming it down to its final size, but getting it close to make sure that the sled slides nicely on the rails. So I like to apply a little bit of fresh paste wax every couple of times that I use it. Just make sure that everything moves nicely and makes it easier to run the sled as I'm working. So get everything set up here. You can see the slab is now fixed down to the flattening table. Got a couple of wedges in to prop it up appropriately. Started flattening, and pretty quickly as I was flattening, I noticed something wasn't quite right with the flattening table. I was getting some odd movement with the sled. So I popped the sled off to take a look and see, and I found that the sled itself was no longer flat, and so you can see here I popped it out. Ended up having to take a plane to the area that was marked. It was, a little bit of a curvature I could see when I put a ruler on it, so took that out, flattened it, made sure both sides were even, made sure it was flat to the tracks, made sure it was parallel to the table. Now everything's good. Let's go back and try flattening again. One thing that I like to do is use the blanket and plastic sheet. That's a trick I learned from Blacktail. Just helps to keep things from moving. Make sure that the slab doesn't start warping while it's just sitting around hanging out between passes or between days of flattening. One thing I tried on this slab was running the flattening table lengthwise instead of across the slab. I did across just to get started and then ran lengthwise. It did work a lot better, but I have since found that it works really well on slabs, but not necessarily on epoxy projects, and you'll see that in the future, the next one up. With that, it's on to sanding. You saw me run 60 grit on the first pass, now up to 80 grit. I like to do one side all the way up, then flip it and run the other side. So you see here, this is just the first side. 60, 80, 120. 120 is about where I'll stop. So typically I like to go up to about 120. That means everything is flat, everything is in good shape. But I know I'm still going to come back with the router. You'll see I've got a couple of touch-ups to do. I've got a bunch of other work to do. So this gets me a nice flat reference surface to work from. And then I'll stop there and I'll come back and hit it with 120 and move up in the grits from there afterwards. With the bottom side done, flip the slab over, hit it with the nylon wire wheel, get that live edge all cleaned up. Once I've got the majority off, using a foam pad and a sanding pad, hit it with the orbital. This will take a lot of the features out of that live edge, but at the same time for me that's okay because this is the facing surface. This is the surface that you would touch, so I don't want anything sharp or anything protruding on that edge. With the live edge cleaned up, starting to come back and sand now. I'll hit it with a 60 grit already. One thing I noticed when I was cutting this, the way that the slab was cut, there was a split. You can sort of see here on one side it's darker and one side's lighter, and that's just the difference in the way that the grain was cut. So it ends up with like a bit of a color changing effect. But in the end, once finish is applied, you really can't tell too much. It worked out okay, which was interesting as I worked through. Hit it now with some 80 grit, and didn't show it here. Of course, went up to 120 as well. With everything flattened out, I can come back now and really start to dial things in. So step one, trim it down to its final size. So you see here, trimming the length and width. And then I got to deal with that little knot hole that's there. This is a pretty good place to put some epoxy in, just to clean things up. One thing I like to use is that giant 12-inch square. Really good way. I know that there's a lot of pieces or attachments you can get for your track saw that'll square it up to your workpiece. A lot of them are expensive. Don't know how much I trust them. They get in the way of some of the clamps. Kind of seems like more hassle than they're worth, and I've got that giant square that cost me basically nothing. Works real well. So I like to use that, and hasn't failed me yet. I get pretty nice straight cuts off of it. Good perpendicularity between the two sides. So as I've mentioned, I've got this knot I've got to fill out, and it had a bunch of bark. It was basically a previous limb. So first thing I'm doing is coming in here and hitting it with the gouges, trying to clean off the majority of that bark and anything that I don't want left over, so I can make sure I get a good adhesion between the epoxy and the underlying wood itself. So just working through, trying to get through as much as possible. It was a long, slow process trying to get in here and get all those little edges. Not a great space to work in, but eventually managed to take off majority of that material. And then, as you'll see, just trying to make sure that everything is clean, came back and hit it with sander, just by hand, 80 grit. Try to make sure that I got a nice roughed up surface that I can get the epoxy to adhere to, so that everything comes nice and smooth. I don't want any separation once it's poured. With that done, toss a piece of tape on to create my dam to hold the epoxy in, mix it up. I did a black dye with a small amount of black and a just hint of silver pigment here, and in the end it kind of makes it look like it was still a knot, and you really can't tell. It blends in so well in the finished wood that it basically is hidden away. With the epoxy cured, I can come back and clean it up. I actually hit it real quick with the track saw, just ran a real nice light pass just to flatten it out, and then now I can come back with the sander and clean away the saw marks rather than trying to flatten out. I do find that the tape allows the epoxy to bow out a little bit, and so that makes it a little easier to work through, a little less work with the sander, which I prefer. With that done, the base work on the tabletop is complete, and so now I'm going to start on the base. This here is a chunk that I'll use to create the 6 legs. So first running it on the jointer to get one clean face, and then I can run it through the table saw to cut my 6 legs using that reference face, or that flat face is my reference. The jointer is one of the newer tools in my shop, and it's really been a joy to work with. Although it is small and has a lot of limitation in terms of what I can truly joint with it, most of what I'm doing isn't requiring a long bed, and so I've done as much as I need to so far. There's been a couple of times I wish I had a little bit more length to get a nice long board, but so far no issues. I've been happy with it, and it really has made jobs like this much easier, where I can quickly get a nice flat reference face to cut off of. Cutting these legs gotta go nice and slow. This is starting off at a 2-inch thick slab and cutting down from there, and so it's a lot for the saw to take through. So run them nice slow passes, nice and easy, I know that I'm going to take these over to the planer and plane them down to their final size eventually, so I don't have to worry too much about it in terms of getting any burn marks or any saw marks. That's all going to get cleaned up later anyways. Once I get all the legs cut out, come back and take the board that I've got for all of the stretchers and crosses and cut that down. So I will have 2 main stretchers and then the crosses, so I need 3 pieces out of this, and I'll slice that all up and send it through. Kind of an interesting moment for me here as I'm recording this voiceover. The place that I used to get all my lumber is no longer servicing that industry. They were a tree service and cut local trees and then sliced them up and sold them, and they've stopped. And so I see the sticker on this lumber and it reminds me of them. It came from them, and sad to have lost them, but that's part of life, and I'll have to find a new lumber source here moving forward. If I have anybody in the Michigan area that is hearing this that knows of a good hardwood dealer, I'm all ears. Like I said before, knew that everything was going to run through the planer. With the saw cuts done, I can send it through. I'll do both sides. The saw will leave a pretty straight face, but I'll run it through anyways. This just allows me to make sure that I get them down to the exact dimensions I want, but also if I run them all through the planer together, they're all going to match identically, and that is ideal. I first ran the legs, then I ran through the stretchers, and now coming back through and finishing off the legs. The legs on the previous table I built were about 1.75 inches. These ones I'm running for 1.5 inches. The table is shorter and a bit less long, and the 1.75 inches probably have looked a little oversized. The 1.5 inches is maybe a little bit more proportionate to the table, and so I decided to change that up a little bit. I think I could have got away with the 1.75 inches and it would have been fine, but I just think this worked out a little bit more proportionally. It makes the two tables look more in unison just based on how they're set up. With everything planed down to the dimensions I'd like, I can now take it over and start cutting it down to pieces. So you see setting up a stop block there, and then I'll come through and slice up all my crosses. I need 6 in total, 3 for the top, 3 for the bottom. So I'll go through and slice those all down out of the wood that I've got. Similar design layout to the last time. I'll use a cross half lap joint for the connection between the stretchers and crosses. So I'll mark those all up with a ruler and mark out exactly where they need to be, and then take them over to the table saw and cut them close to size there. Getting as close as I can, and then any touch-ups I need to do, I can finish up with the chisel after the fact. So mark everything out for that. Really important to mark the depth so that I can make sure I get the table saw blade set to the right height and get as close as possible. All I want to have to do after is just clean up that surface so that it's smooth and flat. With that completed, I can now start cutting them, and you can see here I've got the depths cut, set one block on my fence so that I don't have to run the fence and the miter gauge at the same time. I can get the right depth. I cut one side, flip it over, cut the other side. That way I get identical distance from the end. And then clean out and hog out the material with the saw blade. Do that with all 6 of the crosses, and then come back and repeat with the 2 stretchers. These ones are a little bit tougher because you've got quite a long piece hanging off the end, so just gotta be real careful to hold them smooth. Same little design feature as the last time. Little chamfer on each of the corners. So set up a stop block again on the table saw so I can get them all the same length and slice away. Once I've got all the joints cut, need to cut the ends. Start off by marking them. A little bit of handiwork here, moving the square around to be able to mark them perfectly where I want them. And once I've got one marked, I can come back through with the marking gauge and set that to the right length and then mark them all quickly and easily. Once they're all marked out, come back to the table saw and again do the majority of the cutting with the table saw, and then I'll only have to come back and just clean up the edges with the chisel after. So you can see here, just smoothing out, even with a flat top saw blade, not perfectly flat, so just cleaning up a little bit of that material, and then also like to just sort of taper in a little bit so that they slide in easily when I go to put this all together. And then I will have just an ever so slight amount of cleanup I'll have to do just to get right up to my marking knife line. On the legs, use the marking gauge to mark out where all the cuts need to be. I've done this a couple of ways before. This time I think the easy way, or the easiest way that I found, is to do the majority of the material cutaway with a drill bit and then just come back and clean up with the router bit. Last time I tried to do everything with the router bit and it took multiple passes and was really difficult to get a good result and was not happy with it. So this time I'm going to cut away majority of the material with the drill bit, and that way the router can just come through and easily finish up the passes. Not nearly as much work that it'll have to do to hog out material. And these will end up being the mortises for the mortise and tenon joints that hold all this together. If that wasn't already obvious, hopefully now it is. This, as every project tends to be, was a place that I had an opportunity to learn. I got a little bit, not complacent, but a little bit complacent with how I was doing things, and I did not stop the router before moving it from one piece to the next. And I learned the easy hard way by cutting a big chunk out of a leg that was not supposed to get cut out. So here and now, taking a piece of material from the same block of wood that leg came from, cutting it down from a thickness standpoint, I'll hit it with the hand plane to get a nice flat reference surface instead of where the sawtooth marks were from the bandsaw. Cut away all the material from where that damage was done, and then I'll inlay that block into the gap. Actually did this twice. I'm not going to show that here, but the first time I wasn't happy with how well it turned out, and so I ended up cutting that piece out and running a second inlay piece. Having had the second piece of walnut that I'd cut down, the second half from when I cut this piece in half on the bandsaw, it was pretty easy. Just had to re-clean up a second time and set that in. And this is the second one going in here. This is the exact same process. I'll get most of the material at the router, clean it up with the chisel, and then get a real nice tight fit and hammer that sucker in. I used a spare block to prevent any marks and damage on the surface of the wood. Really didn't need to. I left the block that I was inlaying larger than it needed to be in all directions. That way I could just cut it down after, trim it with the block plane, and dial it right in, rather than trying to get a perfect fit the first time and a perfect orientation. Just easier to bring it in. Took a bit of effort to get this clamped up nicely, but managed to do it in the end. 4 clamps I got on there, try to get as even pressure as possible and as good pressure across all the area as possible. I don't know that I show it real clearly at any point, but you'll never even notice this little fix in the end. it was such a close match in terms of grain color and grain direction that it blends almost perfectly in. I also made that one to the back leg, so it's really out of the way. You don't really see it nearly as much as you would on a front leg, so kind of hidden away in the shadows. Not a big deal. That was one of my big lessons on this one, working through a mistake and not letting it hang me up too much. Yeah, I had to go back and fix it. Yeah, it wasn't fun to fix it. No, I'm not happy with it, but mistakes are going to happen, and being able to work through them and to fix them is important. And learning how to do that and get a nice finish is also important. And I managed to do that on this one, and I felt better about having to fix things in the future. Some other projects coming down the pipe, you'll see some videos where, again, I make some mistakes, and I don't worry as much because I know I can work through the fix on it. I can work through the solution, and come up with a final product that I can be happy with. With all the cuts done, I can now start sanding everything down. I like to use all the blocks, or as many as I can hold at least, together when I'm sanding. So you can see I've got 4 of them here at a time. Should have done 3, but 4 it is, and all the legs at the same time. I say all. I actually started off with 4 and then came back and I made 2 more legs and 2 more crosses. I wasn't happy with the way things were laying out and wasn't sure that things were going to be as sturdy as I wanted, and so came back and cut 2 more, and I had enough material from what I had already been working through that was not a big deal. So finished those all off. Once I got everything sanded up to 220, I hit it with some water to pop that grain up, and then hand sand from there. Just hit it again with the 220 just to knock that grain down. With the legs fully ready and the stretchers and crosses fully ready, I can return my attention back to the slab. I like to finish that off because it helps me understand where the final position of the legs is going to be, so I can start marking in where exactly I want my C-channel, where exactly I need the leg attachments to go. I like to countersink those leg attachments so that they're buried up into the bottom of the slab. That way you don't see them, you don't catch on them. First here, cutting for the C-channel. So step 1, just completely flatten out the area where the C-channel is going to sit and take it down so that the C-channel again will be completely below the surface. Step 2 is to cut down for the legs of the C-channel into the slab, and then come back and use a chisel here to just sort of take the corners off and just round things out. You can see that it's a little bit wet on the wood. Cutting away end grain, much easier and much cleaner if you wet the wood first. It sort of makes it cut nicer. I don't really know all of the why behind that, but I can tell you it works. I can tell you get a better cut. You don't get all that tear out and chip out, and in my books, that's a good thing. So did that here, coming back and hitting it with the round over, little 1/8 inch round over just to give it a smooth surface. Because of that raised section in the middle for the C-channel, can't take the bit all the way around. Come back after, hit that with just a chisel, clean it up by hand, not a big deal. Getting the majority of that done with the router just makes it way easier. With that, I can make my plates for mounting the base to the top. It's important to be able to take this apart in the future if I need to move it. I don't plan on staying in the house that I'm in forever, so this just gives me the opportunity to be able to take that apart and move it a little bit easier. Start by cutting the plate to the size that I want. My cuts are far from perfect. I'll be the first to say that. Not great with metalwork. That's an area I've got some learning and some improvement to do, and perhaps over time I will. But to account for that, coming back and hit it with the file. I like using that fret end file. It gives you a nice handle to be able to work with running over the surface. I hit it with that black marker first so I know where I need to keep hitting, and take it until it's nice and smooth. With all the edges cleaned up, I can now mark out and drill out all the holes. So I need the holes that will have the screws run into the base, and then I need slots for where the bolts will run through for the top. This is one of my least favorite parts. I use an end mill bit on my router to create the slots, so drill on either end and then cut the gap with the end mill bit. It makes an absolute mess. It sounds horrible. It's not easy to get a smooth, clean cut. I probably should use a guide or a fence to run my router along to get that cut, but I don't know. The whole part sucks. I don't love making my own plates. Maybe in the future I'll just have a shop fabricate for me. Nevertheless, got there. I don't show it, but I also hit them with a couple of coats of black spray paint so that they really blend in after the fact, and also give them a little bit of corrosion protection. Those are just, some nice basic soft steel, so they would otherwise rust. With that, it's time to start putting things together. So mounting all the legs to the stretchers. One thing I didn't do last time very well was taping off, and I had a lot of cleanup to do after the fact where the glue had come through. So taped off all my edges and use that to keep the glue, contained and off the other portions of the wood. And then also, coming through, hitting it with a little bit of wood glue mixed with some sawdust just to give it a nice smooth joint. Kind of hides the little gaps since my cuts aren't all perfect. Just cleans that all up and hides it away. And I don't know, I like the look of it better. It's worth a little bit of extra work to put that in. I didn't want to do a plate for the middle. I didn't like the way that turned out last time. And so using these little, I don't even know what to call them. They're little screw-on features, screw-on fasteners. They look like a little 8 out of steel. And then you put one screw into the base and one screw into the top. And they allow a little bit of wood movement and just hold things together. Trying those out on this one. I, like I said, didn't really want to inlay a second piece. Didn't like how that went on the first round with the middle portion. It just didn't work out the first time. So trying something different. Here now you can see I've got holes drilled out for where the screw heads from the base will be, and I just cut through there now the holes for the threaded inserts. I do that before routing out the depth for the plate to sit into, and that way I can cut them with a nice flat surface and mark them out easier. Once this is all done and routed in, it's a little bit harder to get those marked nicely and get everything exactly where you want them to be. So doing that first makes it really easy because you've already got it there, and then you can come through, flatten it down with the router to get that inlay depth. A little cleanup on the edges with the chisel, and nice and easy. Some people take a little bit more time to flatten out that surface underneath. If it was a piece that you were selling, maybe you'd want to do that, and I can see why. It just makes it look a little bit cleaner. But for me, as a piece that I'm going to have at home, don't worry about it. With the inlays done, come back with the router and hit the edges. So do a nice 1/8 inch round over on all the sides. Top, bottom, sides, corners, all of it rounded over. And then come back, and now we're ready to hit it with the sander. Finally take it up to 220 grit. Both the bottom and the top will both get that same treatment now. It was important to have finished the 2 crosses and stretchers prior to that because I used that to set the position of the plates. And I didn't show that here, but I mounted the plates to the top of the top stretcher and crosses and set that on the bottom of the slab. Used it to mark out the exact position. That way things landed perfectly. And then was able to then route out and drill out all the holes in the exact position. A little oversized for the inlay just to make sure there's room for movement, but otherwise everything lined up perfectly. With that, ready to glue everything together. Time to put the base together. I'll start with the bottom, put the 3 back legs on. process is pretty straightforward. Put glue in the mortises, spread it around with my little glue spreader, make sure I have good glue spread along all the surfaces and they're all covered. And then I can set the tenons in, come back, repeat the same thing with the front legs to get them in place. Because the top brace can slide in from the top, it's a little bit easier to do that. So do the bottoms first, and then I can slide in from the top with the bottoms already clamped together, and it's not a big deal. Once it's all glued up, come back and hit it with 220 grit just to make sure everything is nice and smooth. Any glue marks that I may have had or anything that I want to clean up, I can do. And now it's time for finish. First coat, Osmo extra thin, get that good penetration. This is when you get to really see the colors come to life. If you look closely in this shot, you can see the little fix that I had. If you can catch it, good for you. I can't even see it in this video, so I guess good for me, but it is there. I'll go back and hit the base, of course, with 2 coats of Osmo after I'm done the extra thin, just the regular Pollux, and then it's on to the tabletop. Same procedure, coat of extra thin, 2 coats of Pollux. When I do the top of the top surface, I will hit it with a maroon pad on the bottom of my orbital after I've done my first coat of Pollux, and that just sort of roughs up the surface just a little bit and flatten things out just a little bit. But as I've shown before, I find that bumps the sheen up and really just makes things look extra clean and extra smooth. So hit that and then come back with the second coat of Pollux. And again, like with the maroon pad, I'll take a white buffing pad once I've spread all the Pollux around, apply it to the bottom of my orbital, and use that to really work the finish in. That way I'm just coming back at the end and wiping away very little excess, but it really helps also bring that sheen up. With the finishing done, I can insert all of the threaded inserts. Funny. Insert the inserts. One thing I tried new on this table, knowing that I'm going to put plants on it that would be getting watered and would also be, delivering water off of them, is to apply some N3 Nano. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in coatings. I know enough about them. My background is in engineering. It makes sense. But these should help to provide some protection from water and some scratch resistance, which are both valuable for me in this case because I know I'm going to have water on the surface, and I know that I'm going to have plants with pots underneath them or plates underneath them or whatever the case may be, and I'd like to not scratch up the surface as much as possible. Yeah, I can always come back and sand it up and put a fresh coat of finish on it and have no issues, but if I can give it that extra bit of protection, why not? Having used the table for about 6 months now, I can say it's pretty good. It's not perfect. I'll tell you that. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. With all the finish done on both pieces, I can now attach the metal plates to the base and put it in place. Here are the beauty shots. A few with the white sheet there to hide the background a little bit, and then a few more without the white sheet there to give you the view that we get, having the window in the background and the forest behind us. Things turned out really well. The epoxy that I put in blends in. You can't even see it. It's in this shot. You won't know it's there. The fix I put in blends in. You really can't tell it's there. I like it. Maybe more importantly, my wife likes it. And it really fits the room nicely and really achieves what we wanted. That's it for this one. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.